This is my Luigi getup. I'm trying to attract a younger audience because all my videos are almost twice as old as they are. This one's from 34 years ago tonight, May 9th, 1991, Later with Bob Costas. Comedian and comedic actor Don Rickles, in part one of a two-parter, talks about his evolution from being a comedian at strip clubs that had to talk over, let's just say, wound-up patrons. We know what wound up means. To ending up in part of, the Rat Pack with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, and sparring with people all the way till the end. That was Don Rickles, maybe the original and greatest early insult comic.
For staying up later, we're back with Don Rickles. We talked about some of the appearances on the Carson Show and his nightclub act the last time. Did you ever feel as if, just by the law of averages, doing hundreds of shows, you went over the line accidentally and then you regret it?
I don't think I regret it. One time I said, gee, I really dug into that person in my beginnings. I think as years went on and I found success, that I never thought about it twice. I mean, I always said, I'm right. If they can't handle that, they got a problem. But in my beginnings, I would say, yes, I dug in a little deep, but that's what made people look up, because if you come out like a monk and sing a choir song, nobody's going to care, you know.
What's your first name, Muhammad? What's your first name? Habib. How the hell did you get in the front? Look at the way they put him. He could pick me off in 5 minutes. Right in the front, I got a fakakta Arab over here, a boozed-up gypsy broad over there, 3 kids in heat over here, a German pain in the ass over here, 2 Japs that passed away, trick-or-treat Harvey with the turtleneck sweater, Ma Frickett sitting over there waiting for the Pillsbury bake-off, the Spanish guy planning to attack the Mexican, and 2 Polacks on the end waiting for their truck to be fixed.
I always had to pick on people and make it work for me, and that doesn't help all the time, because when I did, interesting enough, Bob, when I did television, I had 3 television series. Carson, all of them loved to say, what's your next bomb coming up? Had CPO Sharkey, the Don Rickles Show on ABC, CBS, the Don Rickles Show, and then I had Foul Up Spoops and Blunders with Steve Lawrence, which was a mistake from the beginning. Not Steve, he was great, but every show, overnight, Chicago, New York, Detroit, biggest thing, forget about it. You had to run alongside of my limo, knocking on the window, Don, say hello. And then when we got to Des Moines, and we started to hit Elko, Nevada, and 3 guys went, Mary, shut it off, that loud guy's on, So those were tough places for me to get. But overnights in the major cities, I was always successful.
See, but I would also think with those TV shows, even though they tried to open them up and let you be yourself, it misses the electricity and the danger of a live television shot. That's where you were at your best. What's going to happen when he comes out on the Tonight Show? Is it going to work? Is he going to get on a roll? What might he say? For better or worse, it's live. You can't do anything about it.
Yeah. It's very true. that excitement, but how do you create that? See, guys would say in shows that I was on, when I had my own show, they'd say, hey, let Don do a rampage. Let him just say anything to fill in here. And if you can't really do that, then you become the guy I do on the nightclub stage, and you wanted to make it a character. So we were confused sometimes between the character and Don Rickles, So it was hard to blend sometimes.
You know what you look like, Robinson? A man on welfare who's just been told he has 3 ex-wives to support, all ugly.
Hey, man, you gotta be kidding about this. I mean, you're gonna throw away 24 years, give up a career just because your new CO is a woman?
You got it.
Hey, man, what is the matter with you? There are women in the service all over the world. Well, I just read the other day that in China, they got a woman who's captain of a ship.
In China, they can get away with it. They all wear pajamas, and they all look alike.
You really gonna send this in to the CO, huh?
No, I'm gonna send it to Deer Abbey and sign it puzzled in San Diego.
Do you have any kind of regret at all? I mean, not that you trade it on balance, but any kind of regret that your tremendous success and visibility as a comic pretty much eliminated any chance to be an actor in most roles, because people would say, wait a minute, that's Don Rickles.
Well, that's the price you have to pay when you get, pardon me, when you get that kind of identification. I was always, as you know, the insult guy, Mr. Warmth, the Sultan of whatever, and and all these titles they gave me. And it was tough to overcome. Producers would back off a little bit because you get this image. But as I say, you can't have it all. I still feel before the big guy in the sky takes the hook for me, I would love to do something, which is a little bit away from character, and hopefully that will happen. But I've had my chances. I've done a few films that Rat Race I played a heavy in that, and that was a picture with Debbie Reynolds and Tony Curtis a lot of years ago. But as I got more and more popular with this kind of image, it was tough. Yet you take a young, brilliant guy, like a young man like a Billy Crystal, who's become a big star in motion pictures. That's great because he's always been funny, but he's never had that image of, like you said, the guy that was rapping on people. And so when you have a tough image, it's hard for people to shake that thought of you.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of Billy's success as a comic is in getting into characters.
Yes, yes.
Rather than creating a specific Billy Crystal persona.
Absolutely, and he's wonderful, he really is.
Yeah, another film you were in was Run Silent, Run Deep with Burt Lancaster and Clark Gable.
Yeah, I carried them. Yeah, I'll never forget the first time, that was the first picture. I never was on a movie set. It was at Goldwyn, right out here. And I had to read for this thing, and I had one of those work lights on the stage. And I came to the studio, and with this, I was with Henry Slate and a few other people, and we walked in, and he said, "Mr. Rickles, you're going to read for this part." And I said, and it was pitch dark, and I was just standing with a light, and Robert Wise was the director, and I said, "Well, will Clark Gable or Burt Lancaster?" No. There'll be a voice off stage. They'll just read the lines for you, and you just read it, and you'll hear them answer the lines, and you do it. And I stood out there, and I said, whatever the lines were, I said, well, the ship is sinking, sir. Will the men be all okay? Well, shall we fire the torpedo? And a voice off camera went, "Take it down 100 feet. Dive, don't worry." And I went, and I started to spit up on myself. And Clark Gable said, do you have a problem, young man? And I went to pieces. But fortunately, I got the part.
Were you entertaining on the set with guys like Gable and Lancaster, or were you too intimidated?
No, I wasn't. I was at the beginning. But there was a guy called Jack Warden, who's a marvelous actor. Great sense of humor. Jack haven't seen him in years, but he was a funny guy. And we did a lot of crazy things, and Gable used to love it, We once got completely undressed, Jack Warden and I, and we embraced each other and sneaked into Gable's, I've never told this, and sneaked into Gable's trailer. And Clark Gable was a very humble guy. He really, very quiet, had a little scotch and went, Teddy, buddy, and Burt Lancaster used to sit around going, "Clark, we're gonna do another scene in a couple of minutes." He said, "Fine." And Burt was still doing those days doing circus tricks, but whatever that means. And so we both got undressed and we were in the thing, and Gable walked in and saw us both on the bed and went, "Oh my God, they're out of control. I think they're fags. I don't know what they are. Wow. Damn, I don't know what's happening here. Wow. Down." And he went nuts. And Jack Warden went, "Hey, sweetheart, we're just having a good time. What are you worried about?" Yeah, we did crazy things like that.
Kind of an enlightening tale behind the scenes of an epic motion picture.
Yes.
Speaking of epic motion pictures, you will be surprised and perhaps flattered to know that long before I ever knew that I'd be sitting here with you, I had seen Man with the Xray Eyes.
Ooh.
The Roger Corman film with you as the carnival barker and Ray Milland as a guy who people thought he was a circus act, but he actually could see through stuff.
That's right. And he had his eyes fixed. They had to, put things in his eyes and make it like giant eyes. And he got an infection. The guy almost died doing this part. And in those days, we did a movie in 15 days. You just came in, there was no rehearsal, nothing. They said, "Roll 'em." You went, "What's my first line?" "Good evening." "Oh, good evening." And you did it, and you boom, 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 and it went like crazy. But it was a great experience. And that picture, surprisingly enough, in those days when you did those quickies, those little thrillers, they made money. And I played a real heavy in that. And Ray Milland was a great guy. All those guys, it's interesting. Gable, Burt Lancaster, who's if he's watching, he hasn't been too well, but I wish him the best. Burt Lancaster, Clark Gable, and you go back, Tony Quinn, all those guys, they really, wonderful actors, Gary Cooper, who I just met once or twice, all those kind of guys never did the method or anything. They were pretty much themselves.
Yeah.
But they portrayed, if they were supposed to be sad, they acted sad. You know, it's like the joke, like you say, Clark Gable, you say, all right, roll him. And he says, you know, Steve, I'm fed up with you, and I'm going to kill you. And then you go, cut. And he goes, how about going to lunch? And it's the same guy, you know. Everybody says, what a great actor. That's what always knocked me out, you know.
Did Beach Blanket Bingo, right? Which was, I think, the last of the beach movies with Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello.
In fact, that was such a hit that Barbara Bush, just recently, Barbara Bush, who I met when I was in the White House, and I was invited to a state dinner, which is another long story. My wife and I have never been to. Have you been to a state dinner?
No.
Well, don't make any plans.
I was actually invited to the White House once.
Were you really?
Yeah. You want to hear the story? Maybe you don't.
No, I got time.
I was invited to
it's 1:30 in the morning. Where are we going?
I was invited to the White House because Bush invited these baseball announcers. He invited Jack Buck and Tim McCarver, and I think Vin was invited, Scully, but he couldn't make it because the National League playoffs were opening in Chicago. It was in early October. And I was going to do the American League playoffs in Oakland, Toronto and the A's. And I felt that I couldn't give up the day before as preparation and then fly in overnight because it was the last series that NBC was going to do before we lost the baseball. So with regret, I had to pass up this chance to go to the White House, and basically Bush has been a broken man ever since.
That was a good one, Bob.
Thank you.
George, I never said it. The 38-year-old kid did it.
So anyway, you were at the state dinner.
Yeah, so I was at a state dinner, and it was the president of Tunisia. And I, being Jewish, that's one of my favorite countries. There was a lot of sheets and a lot of guys going, one guy had a sword, which I thought was out of line. He wanted to make me Jewish again. Oh, funny stuff. If only I was on a show that was on early. Blowing all this stuff with a 1:30 in the morning job. But I went to the White House for President of Tunisia, and Barbara Bush was great. And the seating, when they came for the seating, which is another story, by the fireplace was Barbara Bush, and the Marine Guard took me over and said, this is your seat. I said, no, it must be a mistake. This is Barbara Bush, and that seat is mine. He said, and all of a sudden the voice said, sit down. It was Barbara Bush. And I sat down next to her. We had the best time in the world, because we had this Arab gentleman sitting alongside of her, and he kept going, and she kept saying, don't worry about it. Nah, I got nervous. I figured maybe he saw my mezuzah. But no, it was a wonderful time, and we got to be friendly. Well, she knew me for the inaugural Ronald Reagan. Previous to this, I did the inaugural with Frank Sinatra, and the cabinet went into shock when they heard I was going to be on it, but it was great with Ronald Reagan. Anyway, so that's how I got to meet them originally. Now, they're up in Camp David, and for some crazy reason, she saw Beach Blanket Bingo, Barbara Bush, and in her own handwriting wrote me a note, said, Don, I saw one of the classics of all time, Beach Blanket Bingo. So she saw one of these shows. So I said, I can get you Beach Blanket Bingo. And she and my wife and I found a copy of Beach Blanket and sent it to the White House, and she wrote back, what a great classic. I am so moved. George and I just love it. As a joke, she was putting me on, naturally, you know. So we have that kind of conversation together, and she's been writing us ever since, and now I'm starting to rip up the letters because it's a little too much. You know, how many times can I keep telling George it's wonderful, you know?
But it's an interesting image. Colin Powell on the hotline, and Bush is in watching Beach Blanket Bingo.
Yeah, that is good. Can we go on?
If you sit at a state dinner with Ronald Reagan or George Bush, do they want to be insulted? Do they want you to do you for them?
No. I've never got, except at the inaugural for Ronald Reagan, and I think Ronald Reagan knew me when he was governor, and I ribbed him at many roasts at the Friars, and so he knew pretty much. I think George Bush has always been a wonderful man, but I don't think he wanted Don Rickles to stand up and say, I'm getting fed up, George. I mean, in fact, I was at a Bob Hope thing when he was running for president, and Bob Hope got up and said, Don, you'll come along, and at the end, you'll do a few minutes. Well, Bob Hope that night happened to go over. So he said, you don't have to get up. And I was all set. You know, little pus was coming out of her mouth. I was ready for the poison to really give the president some shots, the future president. And he said, you don't have to get up. And I said, I'll just say a few words. And George Bush leaned over and said, don't get up. You You don't say nothing. They were so nervous that I was going to get up and say something wrong. Anyway, we became friends, and then I saw the president at the, as I said, at the dinner, and he was great. He walked by me and went, hello. And that was about it. Dan Quayle was the one that hung with me. He said, can we have a drink together? I said, don't beg, I hate that. You know, so Dan Quayle and I walked around a little bit, but the president was very nice, and Barbara Bush. They're a wonderful couple, forgetting politics. They're both very down-to-earth people. He really is a sincere man. I don't know why I'm saying this. I'm not going to run for governor, you know. I got my own troubles, you know.
Back after this.
Oh, why?
Even after you've had some success, when you hit that night where, for whatever reason, it isn't working and you think you're dying on stage, is there any way to describe the loneliness and the desperation that you feel?
Well, for me, I always kept going. It's the concentration. I always kept going like I was a hit. I used to say, they're wrong, I'm great. You know in your heart when you're not really making it. There's no question about that. But you'll never let an audience know. That's the kiss of death. And I think in my entire career, I never let an audience, even in my, everything is relative, even when I made $100 a week and struggling in joints, I never let an audience know that I was falling on my you-know-what. And I think that's good advice for any of us in any business. That if you show them, hey, when the show was over, certainly I told my mother, rest her soul, because she was a great influence on me, and I told her all my stories. And then later on, my wife Barbara, we would discuss. You know when you're not cutting. All of us know. But yeah, I always had the dignity for myself to never let the audience know that I was falling on my face.
You mentioned your mother several times, and when she was living, you often referred to her in your act. You'd come out and say to Carson, I was talking to my mother after the last time I was on, and this was her take on my last appearance. Why do you think your relationship with your mother was so close?
Well, I called her the Jewish Patton. That was my fun name with her. And she really wanted me to be a different kind of performer. I have no excuse about that. It's the truth. She wanted me to be, Alan King knows it. She said, why can't you be like Alan King? Or like you said, why do you have to insult people? Why couldn't you just come out and tell jokes? I said, Mom, I don't do that. But the great thing about her was that she was very supportive. I was a very terrified guy when I was a young man. I was, you know, I was uptight about a lot of things, and she really worked on me and made me believe in what I did, even though she didn't sometimes think that was so funny. But she really believed in me, and she was a strong woman. She wasn't the most perfect woman in the world, but for me, she did a lot. And I was almost like, well, my father died young, so I was almost like a second husband, if that makes sense, to her. I was everything to her. She lived her life through me, because she wanted to be an entertainer. And I think I performed, and she saw herself as me. And she wanted to be what I was. And doing so, she helped me to gain confidence.
Would you hear from her that her contemporaries had said, oh, I saw your boy Donnie, and I know he's successful and he's very funny, but he is mean. Why did he say that?
Oh, sure.
They wouldn't get it, you know?
Oh, sure. She would get that, sure. And she would always defend me. And then she would say quietly, you know, Rose was right. You didn't have to call that guy an old man. You didn't have to do that, you know. And then I'd say, well, the check is here, right, Mom? And she'd say, I don't like that kind of humor. She did that, see, because her gums would lock. But she was something else. It's the last of a breed, you know, and so... And the joke was I got lucky. I married a woman that said, now remember, I'm not your mother, that's my wife. You know, she said, I'm not going to be your mother. I'm me. And she really has been herself in her own right. Because you got to realize when you're 38 years old and never married and tight and living in the same apartment with your mother all those years, I mean, and a girl comes along, that's a tough, you know, that's a tough deal. All of a sudden, here he is, and
So even into your late 30s, you were living at home with your mom?
Yeah, yeah.
And at that point, you were reasonably successful out there,
Yeah,
right?
well, I was doing okay, yeah. Well, you know, when you travel on the road, you know, you met Laverne, you know, and you didn't want to marry her, you know, because she did card tricks. So, you didn't exactly meet, you know, I'll make the pot roast here, you sit in the living room, you know. She was dancing in the hall, nude. So, so it wasn't easy, but I was fortunate to meet my Barbara, and we've been together, married happily 26 years.
Accommodations furnished by the Universal City Hilton and Towers. Make your next stay in Los Angeles a memorable one with our spacious rooms, international cuisine, and the attention of a friendly, experienced staff.
This summer finds Don Rickles at the Golden Nugget in Vegas and at Bally's in Atlantic City. Now, before we go, Bruce Kornblatt, our producer, who evidently is a Rickles expert.
A devoted human being.
Absolutely, but too shy.
The Ayatollah Khomeini couldn't have people love me as much as this man. Bruce, I'm telling you from my heart, you should be in this chair. You're better than this man. You're dynamite, Bruce. You're the best living thing. And basically, your personality is weak. Work on that, Bruce. Work on that. And see your dentist. The right tooth, bad.
Just say goodnight. I'm leaving the seat. I'm leaving the seat for Kornblatt. He's too shy, but I'm leaving it open.
Okay. For Kornblatt, maybe Bob Newhart wants to be the host. He'll do anything to get work. Thanks a million. Good night, folks. Wasn't that a dull half hour? I can't stand this man. This man's going nowhere. Look at him. All he left is a toy mic. 11-year-old dummy got hot in this business. Go figure. And I got to kill myself at 64. But I still got it. The left side could be picked up a little bit. I got to go to the bathroom so bad. Is it over? I can't take it anymore. Costas, what a stiff. This man doesn't belong on the air. Oh, God. Now I got to go over and run after Johnny Carson's car and